Welcome to Next Week, Last Night. I'm your host, Stuart Johnson. Thank you so much for joining me today. Boy, do we have a great show in store for you. As you can see, I've finally gotten a haircut. Granted, one that makes me look like I just got released from the gulag, but a haircut nonetheless. Speaking of which, my guest tonight is my barber, because I couldn't afford this little trim job that he did, so he'll be appearing on the show tonight instead. But first, on top of that, we look to answer an important question. Are Slovenia and Slovakia really two different countries? Two Croats and a Hungarian look to answer the question. Of course, now comes our weekly recap of the news. And to be quite honest with you, it's been a slow news week. I mean, not a lot to talk about. I mean, a bunch of TikTokers sabotaged Donald Trump's campaign rally in Tulsa. That was fun. There's a few totally not race-related hangings and shootings that have happened in America that coincidentally happen to involve black people, but you know. Speaking of which, there's of course still the mass riots and protests going on, and oh yeah, of course, Corona's back. So yeah. Slow news week, but that's okay. We'll do just fine, even without it. Now, speaking of COVID-19, in the midst of the lockdown that's still going on in a lot of places and is starting to lift in other places, over the course of the last 3 to 4 months, people have been stuck at home. And some of them have been fortunate or unfortunate enough, depending on who you ask, to be stuck with their significant others. And considering they had a lot of time and not a lot to do, well, let's just say that next generation of kids born about 6 to 9 months from now are going to be called the Pandemials, the Coronians. Hey, you guys can come up with a name. Why do I mention this? Well, in the smoothest transition since Conchita Wurst, that inadvertently leads us to our main story tonight, the false reporting of sex offenses. Now, in the midst of the rise of the Me Too movement and a lot of actors, directors, producers, politicians, and even presidential candidates being caught poking people with their thingies that really didn't want to be poked, a new issue has risen in response to the Me Too movement, which is the issue of women, some women, falsely accusing men of sexual assault and harassment in an effort to either ruin their reputations, their careers, or simply to blackmail them into paying them a settlement fee. And as a result, a number of people have started accusing the Me Too movement of enabling this predatory behavior from women. So, our main story tonight, what we're going to look to do in this episode is take a look at the false reporting of sex offenses and whether or not it is a real issue that seriously needs to be addressed or really just a bullshit excuse being conjured up by rape apologists to try and devalue the Me Too movement and take something away from it. Now, when looking at these two factions, each one will tell you that the other one's full of shit. The Me Too movement will call the false reporting crowd a bunch of rape apologists, and these guys will call the Me Too movement a bunch of liberal bullshit propaganda that's trying to ruin men who have done nothing wrong. And worked very hard to get to where they are. Now, I think I'm uniquely qualified to be objective on this issue, considering the fact that women are repulsed by me, and therefore I don't really have to worry about either of these things ever happening. So where does the issue come from? What's the crux of this whole thing? Well, it all boils down to one word: consent. Consent is the main fundamental issue that this whole debate and this whole discussion and this whole problem is built around. And that's why before we can talk about false accusations and whether they're real or not, whether it's a real issue or not, we have to address the issue of consent, because there are still so many people, like you would not believe, who actually don't know, don't understand, or don't want to know what consent is and how it really, really works. Now, whether that's down to poor sex education or a patriarchal system that has enabled men for centuries to do shit and get away with it, I don't know, and that's really not relevant to the discussion right now, but it is the core issue right here. What is consent? Who can give it? When can it be received? And what does it imply? So before we talk about who can give consent, let's talk about those individuals who can't give consent. Because here's the thing, just because someone gives you consent doesn't mean you're actually in the position to take it. Doesn't mean their consent is valid. For example, everybody knows that children, minors, are incapable of giving consent, meaning if you have sex with a 14-year-old, doesn't matter how much they consented to it, you're still going to jail. But there's other circumstances as well. Basically, anyone who is not of sober body and mind is not allowed to give consent. So if you're dealing with a person who's drunk or high or being blackmailed, forced into it, in all those scenarios, the consent given is deemed not valid, not applicable. It's like signing a contract. If someone tries to get you drunk and then you drunkenly sign a contract that they put in front of you, that contract is not valid because you were not of sober mind when you signed it. On top of that, another issue that's come up is a lot of people don't actually understand what consent implies. So, all right, say you're not dealing with a minor and you're not dealing with anyone who's drunk or stoned and you're not blackmailing anyone either. Even then, when you are given consent, it's not a green light to just go and do whatever you want. Because a lot of people forget that an individual has the right to change their mind regarding consent at any time for any reason. And if you fail to respect them changing their mind, you are breaking the law. Same way in which giving consent to one thing is not giving consent to everything. I guess the best way I could describe it is a lot of people like to imagine consent as a CAPTCHA button. You press it, it rotates, you get the little checkbox, and now you can go ahead and do whatever you want and use the website because you were given consent. In reality, consent is a lot more like those terms and conditions forms that you have to sign before you use a new piece of software, for example, or buy a new phone. They're long, complicated. No one really bothers or likes reading them. There's tons of conditions in them that can be changed at any time for any reason, and failing to respect those conditions can land you in jail. So now that we've talked a little bit about this, and by the way, there have been some half-assed efforts to try and tackle the issue, but some of them have been truly fucking pathetic. Like, take those consent condoms that some companies have started peddling on the market that basically try and combat the issue by requiring 2 people or 4 hands to open the box. Aside from the fact that the mechanism doesn't even work because some people have already found a way to open the box all on their own, it also doesn't address the fact that most rapists don't bother to use a condom anyway, and second of all, it doesn't address what we just talked about, the issue of not all people being able to give consent, and consent being able to get taken back at any time for any reason. So now that we've touched on that, now that we've gone over what consent is or isn't, let's talk about it. Let's talk about false accusations, false reporting, and whether or not it is a real thing. Before I say anything else, I want to say the answer to that question is yes. False reports are real. They happen. This is undeniable. There is plenty of evidence to support it. Men really do get falsely accused of sexual assault and harassment. That being said, what I think is the issue here isn't so much as whether or not it happens, but rather whether or not it happens enough for it actually to be considered a big deal. And that is where we come into the next point I'm about to make. False reports are incredibly, unfathomably rare. Like, so rare you would not believe. They are a statistical anomaly. They almost never happen. Contrast that to what the Me Too movement is fighting, the systemic oppression and disadvantages that women have been faced with, and the constant battle against sexual assault and harassment in the workplace. That is extremely common. In fact, there's pretty much not an industry on this earth that you can find where that stuff doesn't happen. Whether it be the infamous casting couch in Hollywood, or politicians forcing news reporters to sleep with them in order for them to get exclusives, women being forced to sleep with their bosses to keep their jobs. I'm not even going to touch on the whole Roger Ailes incident and all the stuff he did. This is a very real issue, and it happens all the time. And the saddest part about it is 90% of the time, nothing even happens. You think you hear in the news all the time, oh, this guy's been accused, this guy's going to prison. You'd think with all these reports coming out that, it's almost impossible to get away with it these days. But it's actually not. For starters, most sexual assault cases never even get reported. The vast majority, upwards of 80%, never even get reported because the women are either too shamed, too embarrassed, or simply too scared to speak up. Of the few cases that do get reported, an even smaller percentage go to trial, and then amongst those that go to trial, an even smaller percentage actually result in criminal convictions. That's before we get into the issue of rape on college campuses, which is so rampant and so terrifyingly real, and yet so consequence-free that it is estimated that 1 in every 5 girls who goes to college will be raped at least once during her 4-year stay there. And think about that. 1 in 5. 1 in 4, it was 1 in 5. 1 in 5. Try and imagine that for a second, because when I hear that statistic, I think about all my high school friends who are going to college now. I had 30 girls-ish in my grade. So out of those 30 girls, 6 of them are likely to get raped. And I have to think about that. 6 people I know are very likely going to be assaulted at some point in the next 4 years. You cannot tell me that this is not a real issue. You cannot try and say that the Me Too movement isn't trying to fight something real and isn't trying to make serious and important change, because there is a mountain of undeniable evidence that shows that women have had to put up with this shit for centuries. And we are still not even scratching the surface of how much of this stuff actually happens. Now, that being said, I said I was going to be fair. I said I was going to be objective. So, let's for a second take the side of the Me Too movement's bullshit crowd. Well, for starters, the Me Too movement isn't bullshit, as we just discussed. But, as we also just discussed, false accusations are real. Incredibly rare, but real. You want to know how rare they are, actually? Here's a fun statistic for you. You are more likely to be falsely accused of committing murder than you are of being falsely accused of committing rape. That is how unlikely it is. So why do men, because this is mostly men, why do men have this chronic fear of it happening to them? Why do men believe that this is so rampant? Well, it's all about self-importance. See, a lot of guys wrongly want to believe that they're so important and that someone would actually bother wanting to ruin their lives, that they are convinced that it's going to happen to them. Put it to you, actually, this is a good way to put it. Think of it like winning the lottery, right? Winning the lottery is statistically one of the most unlikely things that can happen to you in life. I think you're more likely to get struck by lightning than you are to win the lottery. But everybody wants to believe that it can happen to them because everybody wants to believe that they're special, that they're different to everybody else, and that when they buy that ticket, it's going to be different. It's a similar sort of thing here. Even though false accusations are extremely, incredibly, unbelievably rare, what guys do is they want to believe that someone somewhere is actually going to take the time and bother to accuse them of it. But think about that for a second. Why take me, for example? I'm just some random asshole with a half-baked YouTube channel who makes videos in his spare bedroom once a week, or twice, hopefully, soon. Why would anyone in their right mind want to ruin me? What, so they could sue me for money I don't have? And that's the thing. Of all the guys who worry about this stuff happening to them, 99% of you don't have to worry because you have nothing worth stealing. Why would a woman put herself through coming out and accusing someone to sue them for money that the guy doesn't have, or ruin a reputation that really most people don't give a shit about? What, to embarrass them in front of a few hundred friends and family members? It's not logical. Fair enough, I can understand if you're some Hollywood millionaire or a CEO of a company and you have to worry about people wanting to screw you over and ruin your reputation and steal half your money. Fine, I can sort of understand that. But I've met high schoolers, 17-year-old, 18-year-old dudes who are like, oh yeah, man, I'm scared of going on dates with girls because I worry they're going to accuse me of something that I didn't do. I'm like, dude, why would anyone bother? What, to sue you for the $30 you have in your back pocket? And that's the thing. In a way, it's actually incredibly misogynistic, because those men don't actually realize the pain and misery and the embarrassment that women have to put themselves through when they actually come out and confess about this kind of stuff. What woman in her right mind would agree to being called a slutbag, whorebag, liar so she could fuck over some guy? You're really not that important. I promise. Now again, that doesn't mean these things don't happen. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't take precautions. Which is why I've brought in someone who knows a lot more on the subject than I do, who should be able to give both sides some much needed insight into this important topic. And so please join me in welcoming our senior sexual relations correspondent, Jerry McJerkoff. Please, Jerry, take it away.
Oh, just a second, Stuart. Oh, fuck. I'll be out in a minute. Shit.
Okay. We'll come back to you later, Jerry. Anyway, I guess we'll just continue. So speaking of which, so precautions, right? What are some things that can be done? Well, for starters, a lot of men, and I can understand this to a degree, fine, you want to take precautions, I can get on board with that. Most companies now have a policy of no longer allowing one-to-one interviews between males and females. So if a female candidate is applying for a job, she's no longer allowed to be interviewed by a man alone. There has to be either a video recording of the interview or a witness has to be present. Most men now keep their office doors open whenever they have a woman over for a meeting. Most of them have stopped inviting women over to their homes and have started insisting on meeting in public places. And these are all okay, understandable, necessary precautions. Well, maybe not necessary, but understandable precautions that the guys can take. Fine. But fundamentally, we have to, this is something that we just have to, we cannot allow ourselves to fixate on such a small issue when so many people are being genuinely hurt on a systemic level. We cannot allow a few statistical anomalies to take away from the bigger picture here. Now, that being said, girls, ladies, I hope you know most guys are not rapists, okay? And this is also a statistical fact. Most guys are perfectly, well, I was going to say normal, but that's not true. Let's just say perfectly law-abiding-ish citizens. In fact, recent studies have concluded that only 6% of all men in America are likely to be rapists. And that number is even lower in some other places. The problem is that those who do commit rape average about 6 victims per rapist. So again, whilst I can understand women also taking precautions and being careful and bringing pepper spray with them and not meeting guys in their homes and all that stuff, I hope you know 90% of the time, the guy you're meeting is fine. He's not going to hurt you. A little bit of common sense is really what this discussion needs. Oh, and by the way, one more thing I want to say before we sign off on the show. To all the men out there who are afraid of false reports and who think that the Me Too movement's a bunch of liberal bullshit and that it's enabling this kind of behavior, you know who hates those false reporters more than anyone, more than you do? Actual rape victims. Yeah, they hate those people. You want to know why they hate them? Because every single time a woman comes out and falsely accuses someone of assaulting her and gets caught doing it, that takes away and degrades and devalues all the other women who have genuinely been assaulted, who are now going to be accused of being liars because this other dumb whore actually lied. Which makes an act and a process that is already incredibly difficult even fucking harder. So many women refuse to come clean about what happened to them because they know they're going to be accused of being liars. They're going to be accused of being gold-digging whores. And so they just stay quiet. So trust me, these two factions, you're on the same side. You are all on the same side. And it's time to start acting like it. A little bit of common sense is all this conversation needs. Because you're both right. Sexual assault is a real issue. Women really have been through a lot, and men really have been allowed to do some horrid shit and get away with it for decades. And yes, false accusations do also happen. But to try and use that as an excuse to just never trust a woman who says she was accused ever again, who says she was assaulted ever again, that's not the answer here. We're all on the same team. Trust me. So work together. And who knows? Maybe we can make something that works for all of us. Because believe it or not, I know for a fact the real reason why so many guys are terrified of the Me Too movement is because they think it's going to make it harder for guys to get laid. Because they think it's going to make it harder for guys to get girlfriends. It's going to make it harder for guys to, have sex. Because all women now, they think all men are rapists. Or if we have sex with them, we have to worry about being falsely accused of rape. Da-da-da-da-da. And again, that's an extremely misogynist view because it assumes, falsely, that women don't like sex. Which they do. Women, just like men, enjoy having sex. They just enjoy having sex willingly, instead of being forced to do it to keep their jobs or get ahead in the world. That is what this really is about. Before we go, I'd like to give you a quick word from our sponsor for this episode. This episode of Next Week Last Night is brought to you by Taco Bell. Taco Bell. The only thing getting assaulted here is your wallet and your dignity. Right, thank you so much for joining me, ladies and gentlemen. If you enjoyed this, please make sure to leave a like, subscribe if you haven't already. That we have a new episode coming out every single week. Please, if you have any thoughts or opinions on the topic, make sure to post them in the comments section below. You can find us on Instagram now. We've finally created an official Instagram account at Next Week Last Night. You can find us there. We post exclusive clips from every single episode as they get released. It's a good way to keep up with the show and know when a new episode is out. I have been your host, Stuart Johnson. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you all next week. Good night. Right. Okay then. So, consent, sexual assault. So guys, what you want? Hey Stuart, you there? Stuart, you listening? Ah, damn it.